If you work for the Catholic Church and want to transform your parish and put more souls in the pews, we are here to help. I'm John Kahns, and this is the Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast, your favorite leadership development podcast for Catholic churches. Each week, you can expect engaging discussions, expert interviews, and actionable advice to help you move Jesus' mission forward in your parish. Today, we're talking with John Gaffney, Director of Evangelization and Mission for the Diocese of Des Moines. Today, we're going to talk about moving from listening to action and how synodality becomes real pastoral renewal inside a parish and a diocese. John, welcome to the podcast.
It is so great to be with you, John. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. No, when we had for our listeners, behind the scenes, I always try to plan a little call, 10, 15, 20 minutes, just to talk about whether that's a good fit to have a guest on the podcast. And it's going to be a good conversation when it runs into 30, 40 minutes like it did with us. And so you're in for a treat today. I know synodality, people hear that and they start to kind of check out and go, oh my gosh, not this again. But John has such a refreshingly positive outlook on synodality, and they've borne real fruit by taking that process seriously. So I want to talk about today how this synodality, how taking that seriously, really trying to implement it for the good of the people that he serves, and how that's borne great fruit in the Diocese of Des Moines. Before we do that, though, John, I know a little bit about who you are and what you do, but for our listeners, give them the 10,000-foot view, the scope of the ministry that you do, what's led you to today.
Yeah, no, great question. So, John, first of all, I think the most important thing is I did not grow up in the Catholic faith. I'm a person who came into full communion into the church. And so if you've ever would have said, someday you're not only going to work for the church, but you're going to work with the bishop on things, evangelization and faith formation, I would have said, I don't know what you're on, but that's not going to happen. But the Holy Spirit is amazing and takes us in so many different directions. But ultimately, just like with many people in the church, I had a priest my pastor, Monsignor Frank Chida, who passed away a few years ago, who invited me into ministry to take a look and give it a try. And it stuck. I was in youth ministry for 8 years at that particular parish, and then another 5 years at another parish before being invited by Bishop Pates of our diocese here in Des Moines to come into what was at that time evangelization and catechesis. And then when Bishop Johnson took over after Bishop Pates retired, we had a strategic planning process and reorganized, and that role morphed into evangelization and mission. And now we have most of our ministerial outreach in one particular team. So we can really focus strategically in 6 different pastoral areas to help our parishes gain clarity on how they can move ahead in their local mission.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So you have this really, honestly, I think sometimes that's the best thing is when somebody's worked in the trenches for a number of years. You said 8 plus 5, I think is 13. And I don't have my calculator in front of me. I don't know how I'm supposed to do that. So 13 years just on the ground in the trenches, really working with the people in the parish, and then also experiencing from that side what it's like to work with somebody at the diocesan level, and kind of that interplay, that dynamic that happens naturally in most dioceses on some level, and then to be able to move into this. So you've got this really great breadth and scope of what that whole dynamic looks like when you look at the church on a grander scale, from bishop to diocese to parish, and then all the way back up the chain. And so, like I said, though, I think you have a very positive view of synodality in a time when people really are pretty skeptical of the process and the actual, like how good this thing actually is. Okay, we're just going to go to the laity, ask them a bunch of questions, and then see what comes out of that. Because we know what it's like to work in parishes with 100 families that all have 100 different opinions on how you should do things. So kind of paint the picture for us, though, because you didn't see this as a waste of time or an exercise in futility or anything like that. When you think about synodality, kind of paint the picture for us. How do you define it just in practical terms for parish leaders, especially as kind of that listening that leads to action?
Mhm.
Kind of paint that picture for us.
Yeah, no, great question, John. When there are two kind of buzzwords that have been around for a while now: synodality and pastoral renewal or parish renewal. And so, and I was in the same boat. I was thinking about, okay, how is this synodality, which we've always had synodality. I mean, when you think about Father having a pastoral council and trustees and a finance committee or a school board or a faith formation committee or a youth minister having a youth advisory committee, those are synodal bodies that give Father great wisdom and insight to make decisions. So synodality is part of the structure of the church. But as we were thinking about synodality in a different way, and then also looking post-pandemic about how do we renew our parish structures, we had a lot of bad news. You had the rise of the nuns, NONES, that was saying young adults were abandoning our church. If anybody listening, if their diocese is different than ours, congratulations. But a lot of people not having great luck keeping people confirmed into the church, or even those who came through a OCIA becoming Catholic process, staying within the church 4 or 5 years afterwards. That was kind of a problem, and so it got me thinking about, what about if this is the same spirit-led movement? And so that's where it got me thinking, and what I shared with you is I posit that synodality and pastoral renewal, they're not separate movements, but two dimensions of the same spirit-led journey. And so, first of all, synodality is that opportunity to walk together, to accompany someone, but also to listen and discern, so that with that dialogue, we can hear, not to respond, but to understand what is happening in the lived experiences of those people we are working with. And also, through them, maybe those people who are not coming through into the church, who will never darken the doorstep of our parish community, but who Father has a responsibility to, because as a pastor, he's responsible for all the souls of that territory. So that does that part. But then pastoral renewal seeks to translate that listening into action. So what you have is periodically taking a pulse of what are the pastoral needs of the whole community, not just those coming into the church every week for Mass or hopefully daily or coming to our programs, but those within the whole community, and then trying to translate into action what you've heard. And that's I think the heart. Those two things together are essential, and it gives then the pastoral council with Father and all of the staff a great opportunity then to say, what can we do to increase engagement, to increase movement on this?
Yeah, and I think that's important to draw that out a little bit, because if I'm a Catholic ministry professional listening to this podcast and I'm hearing you talk, all I'm hearing is, well, we need more meetings and more committees. And it sounds like, yeah, that's really what it's about. How do you reclaim the real meaning of that, though? And you really talk about moving from action, and I've heard you say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So how do parishes that just hear more meetings, more committees, how do those parishes that struggle to move from listening to real change, like how do you encourage them to actually implement these things?
Yeah, no, great question, John. And the thing of it is, I am not a fan of meetings. I don't doze off in meetings, but I'm not a fan of meetings. But when I when I think about work, I try and say, how can I work smarter, not harder. And so this is really not about meetings. What it is mostly it is about taking a look at what the structures is. And in fact, I would propose for anybody listening to try once a year a town hall with a facilitated town hall. It doesn't have to be terribly difficult questions. You know, it could be something as simple as where you've got people gathered, you train local pastoral council person to be at each table and maybe some staff members. And you start off with saying, tell me about what's going on in your life. What is going on in your family? What's, are you, if there's some retired people out there, what's going on in your life? Let's talk about that. And so what the facilitator at each table does is takes notes, but then kind of sees what's rising to the top of each of those areas. Then after that is happening, then follow up with a question. And during that, the facilitator basically just does one of two things. Basically says, hey, John, when you said this, ... tell me a little bit more. That needs a little clarity. When you said this, what does that really mean? Or describe that a little bit more. Or thank you. That's that. But then you starting to see the lived experience. Then the follow-up question is, based upon what you said, how can our parish help you with that lived experience? And then you do the same thing. And then you start sharing table to table in that as you close the evening. What did you hear coming from your table? Then all of that data then gets translated to or given to the pastoral council and father and to whomever. But here the thing is, the listening is not to respond. It's to understand. It's so that father, who cannot be in several thousand places at once, can understand the lived experiences of those people that he is there to serve, and his staff and the deacons. And so it really is in one session an opportunity to hear. It's also a great opportunity to call forth new people to serve on leadership committees, because then what you do is you release, okay, here are the top 4-5 things that rose to the top. We can only deal with a few, but these are the things that rose to the top, and we need boots on the ground. But this also helps you define, okay, if we're going to do missionary activity 1, okay, do we have people that are formed to be able to do that? If not, what formation process will help us be able to make that happen? Do we have the funding available? If not, do we need to actually go out and try and get some funding, whether it's through diocesan grants? Here at the Diocese of Des Moines, we have Parish Mission Renewal grants that we give to parishes who want to try something new. Or if it's to see if people within the parish will fund this activity a little bit more. But it provides great opportunity to have tangible action plans to be able then to go ahead and achieve that particular piece. And all you did was invest in one evening, perhaps with a potluck. You know, we love potlucks in the Catholic Church. So I hope that helps a little bit, John. But it's not about meetings. It's about taking the structures you have, but then adding a little bit more efficiency to hear people, and then that gives you the data then to start something.
We say that all the time on the podcast is you probably don't need more meetings. Mm-hmm. You just need more effective meetings more often. And so that's about, we have a leadership alignment workshop, and that's really what we try to teach those parish staffs, those people, even if it's just a ministry leader. How do you have more effective meetings more often with your people? And that means just trying to figure out a way to do that within the structure of what you're already doing. But there are rhythms that you can implement, such as even once yearly having this town hall meeting. And when real fruit is born of that, when people are really heard and they go to their friends and say, hey, we had this town hall. It was really great. We actually got a chance to talk about the things that matter to us as parishioners, and they heard us. They tell their friends the next year more people come because they
Yeah.
know, oh, this is actually translating into something. And like you said, you don't have to, kick the whole thing out and start from scratch. You can begin to implement those things and themes will arise. And, when we talk about leading from vision, right? Discerning from the Lord, what's the vision you have here, Lord? And implementing it, what you find is it does resonate with people. And that's a part of that discernment is what are the people asking for? Where are the people asking Christ to enter into their lives and their experience as a part of our parish? Where is Christ in all this? And when you do that, and then you use your prophetic office to proclaim, hey, this is where God is leading us, it resonates
Hmm.
because the Spirit is doing the same work. The Spirit's not leading 100 people 100 different directions. He's leading all of us to the kingdom. He's leading all of us into the heart of Christ. And so that's what the Spirit is doing. So when you are discerning from that and proclaiming that in this way, then you're really just tapping into this tidal wave, this river of living water that's already there, just waiting for people to step into it. Now, I imagine though, you give this voice to people, and one of the things that our listeners are probably going is, oh man, you crack open that nut, and all these things are going to come out. And again, coming back to this idea that culture can eat a good plan for breakfast. How have you seen, as you've had these conversations over and over again, what are some of the ways that you see culture resist renewal, and then how to enter into that constructively?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. John, I'm one of those people who don't ask people to do things that I haven't already done myself. So right now, I'm engaged with working very closely in a parish as part of my job to do some mission, what I like to call mission revival, which I think every parish needs to do on occasion. So I'm doing all of these things that I'm talking to you about this morning. But, first of all, before I answer that question, I think, first of all, this does require a certain amount of humility. It requires a certain amount of patience, and it definitely requires trust in the Holy Spirit because the I think most people think what's going to happen is this. People are going to want parliamentary democracy, or they're going to want majority rule decision making, or they want us to change the teachings of the church. Or they want an opportunity to come after everything that we've done that we haven't lived up to their expectations. Well, I guarantee you the last one will happen, that we haven't lived up to their expectations, especially the first time you do this. Because if we didn't listen to them to hear what their expectations were, and they didn't actually tell us what their expectations were, of course, their expectations are not going to be met. Now, if this first time you just kind of say, okay, this is part of leadership, and we need to hear, again, not to respond, but to understand, then what we do is we hear what people are saying in these small table discussions. And we take that information to see where it's going. But I guarantee you, and to everyone who's listening, John, what you're mostly going to hear is about the lived experience is about the the healing that is needing to happen. My kids are no longer practicing the faith, and we've supported Catholic schools, and our kids went through Catholic schools. Or my spouse is not Catholic, and I didn't think that was going to be a big thing to begin with, but it's becoming a harder thing as I'm raising the kids Catholic, and he or she doesn't agree. Or so many things that around today's culture that are at odds with the church, and it's hard for people to engage. You're going to hear mostly about those things. And those things are going to be really hard to say, how do we make an effort in moving that needle forward? But the biggest thing I would say about starting this the first time is have humility as a leader, listen to the shots that people will definitely bring, but also try and say, when you said that about our faith formation program, not really cutting the mustard and what you really needed for your family, tell me a little bit more about what you do need for your family, and some different things like that. Or what did you need for your marriage? You're talking about your marriage having some difficulties. What would be maybe one tangible thing that the church could do for your marriage? And so then again, you're trying to understand, and then the pastoral council with father, his staff, all of them can discern all of this information and say, hey, I didn't realize how difficult some of our marriages are happening in our parish. And it really came out in all of these table things. I'm going to work with the diocese, and I want to work with us here at the parish is around better marriage enrichment opportunities, looking at our pre-Cana practices, and maybe to have more opportunities for some couples to accompany others, and look at maybe some of those apostolic opportunities that groups have, like CEW or things like that. So I hope that helps, John. But that's where all of this will lead to fruit, even though in the beginning it might be a bit painful.
And I imagine another tangible piece of this for the pastor who's listening to this, we can get so caught up in this making the sacramental rhythm of the church happen that we don't actually have time to connect with people the way we would. And sure, we run off and you have to do your anointings at the bedside. You have your family, in the funeral process, trying to help them process their grief. But those are just little touch points that, they're big hallmark moments. But this is an opportunity to step into and hear the heart of your people in a real pastoral way, which I think a lot of our pastors lament the fact they have their own grieving over the fact that they became a priest to minister to hearts. And in so many ways, they're taken out of that because they have so many other meetings, pressures, things they have to do, so many other hats they have to put on for the church that they're in charge of. This creates a real moment to then step in as pastor, to minister to these hearts, to simply be present with them in these things that they need to bring up with you, to hear them and to respond then with that. Because the other temptation for our Catholic ministry professionals is we sit in our towers and we plan out these things we think will be so good for people, and then they don't hit right. And we wonder why. What's wrong with these people? They don't love my program that I've been slaving over. Well, this is a real concrete way to be able to name what we would call in the business world pain points. And the pain points are the kind of little strings you want to pluck on in order to offer people the solution. And of course, the solution is Jesus Christ. And that's what we're trying to offer through all of our programs and stuff. But to finally be able to identify and speak into these places where people are hurting and then offer them a solution, that's a beautiful, tangible fruit that can come out of this. And so I'm wondering, kind of as you've done this work in the Diocese of Des Moines, what's been shifting? How have you seen some of those conversations change in your role as you've approached pastoral renewal with kind of these two dimensions of the spirit-led journey and kind of opening up these conversations for people?
Yeah. So I think one of the things, as you're in this culture change, and we talked a lot about, again, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that's why synodality is so vital to pastoral renewal, because as you said, you're not sitting in your ivory tower. One of the shifts that lead to culture change for leaders is to shift from this mindset of I'm doing this for ... to I'm discerning with dot, dot, dot. And let me give you a tangible example of that, John. When I was a youth minister, my first work at the Basilica of St. John, I really definitely had that doing for mentality. And it was a small parish, but it had some great people, and I had some wonderful youth, one of which is on my staff today. So it's great joy. But I learned something near the end of that 8 years that I wish I would have learned early on, and that was to have a youth advisory committee, which I took into my next job over at St. Teresa's. I had this youth advisory committee, and the youth advisory committee really helped decide what would help their peers. What do they need from the church? What helps them? So then it helped me take that limited budget that if all youth ministers have, or to say, I need to fundraise with the Altar Society, Altar and Rosary Society, and the Knights of Columbus, or whomever, to try and be able to do some of these things. It helped me focus so that I was then able to have more effective programming. And the young people knew more of what they needed than I could. And it blossomed from less than 10 people when I first arrived 5 years, and then in 5 years up to over 70. It is a strong conviction of going from doing for mentality to discerning with. Again, you can't do everything, so you got to figure out what rises to the top. And of course, we want to keep in mind church teaching is non-negotiable, but we do want to be able to do that. The other thing with regards to your question, John, is really about focusing on those siloed mentalities that you think about. So, for example, going back to that table discussion about marriages, well, our religious ed programs really deal with families, if you think about it, more than just kids. So, what about if instead of the religious ed director just focusing on programming for kids, that maybe whoever's working with adult faith formation, they team together and they offer some marriage enrichment opportunities at the same time that religious education is happening, or other opportunities together with that particular group. And the same thing with the school. So the mentality, as you gather more information from synodality, is then you're able to learn how to be a better leader, and to kind of like what St. Ignatius of Loyola would tell us, to how to walk through their door, but help bring them out our door. So going away from doing for to discerning with, and then moving out of siloed mentality.
I want you to say a little bit more of that. Kind of give us a little more concrete, if you could, in terms of moving from doing for to discerning with. And I think for the average Catholic ministry professional, we get great theology backgrounds, we get training in that area. We're not trained how to lead specifically.
Yeah.
We learn it as we go a little bit. We pick up things. Maybe we pick up a leadership book or something like that. But I'm curious, what guardrails do you put in place? Because I can see trying to discern with a group of youth, adults, whoever it might be, it's really easy to get lost in the strong personalities. But eventually someone has to make a decision, right? Somebody has to lead. How do you lead discernment, I guess, is the real question there, with guardrails that allow you to make decisions and move forward, even if there are differing opinions in the room?
Yeah. Well, great question. So the first thing is to really go back to the basics of what is servant leadership. Many times we ask people to be on some kind of a leadership opportunity without actually forming them on leadership essentials. And you don't have to have a master's degree in leadership dynamics, but there are certain essentials, including the essential that at the end, it is Father that is going to make the ultimate decision. That again, this isn't parliamentary decision making. And so what has to happen is, again, what is bubbling to the top and how can we come up with the best solution or solutions that we can then give to Father to make that decision. And even knowing that then Father may say, I like this, but I want to add this into it. And with those strong personalities, I think the most important thing is to always say one on one, John, you are incredibly gifted, but this is about the group making a communal decision of recommendation to Father, not just one individual. I think the other thing, this is a very tangible thing. Some of the most powerhouse ideas are going to come from your people who are introverts, not the people like myself who are extroverts who will just talk as soon as you give me an opportunity to. So make sure your agendas, this is a very practical thing, make sure your agendas and the table topics you want to have be discerned are sent out well in advance. That allows those people who are introverts who are not necessarily shy, but they're deep thinkers. I think as I'm listening to you, John, or I'm listening to other people, that's how I think. So that's why conversation is so important. But for our introverts, they are thinking, and then they will then take that into it. Right now, I'm leading a discussion, a task force on changing the age of confirmation. We already gone through half of the process, which is what to change confirmation, what age to change confirmation to. Now we're going through the second part of the process is how do we do it? I guarantee you between clergy and some of the members of the lay part of the task force, which is 21 people, there are lots of strong personalities. But again, if you show this as a spiritual exercise grounded in prayer and that it's a safe place for everyone and your agenda and the conversations are detailed well in advance for people to think about, you will level the playing field. I've seen it time and time again.
And I would say that's why, you had mentioned sending the questions out or, far in advance, which backloading that means you have to have already kind of thought through some of this, have discerned as leadership. This is where we feel the Lord is calling us, and that might feel more general, but it's going to be concretely implemented with these things. But that it does assume that you've spent some time thinking about this. You're not just walking into the room completely empty
Yeah.
without some idea of where the Lord is calling us. There still has to be some guidance, some vision behind the reason for meeting and where God is taking us and why, so that it can frame that conversation. This isn't just something that you just show up one day and do. It's part of an ongoing process of discernment. And I would imagine coming into your second or your third yearly meeting with your town hall meeting or whatever it is,
Mhm.
there's something to point back to. And Moana taught us this, right? To know where you're going, you have to know where you've been.
Yes.
Moana theology, if you will, right? So, I mean, there's a little bit of reality that directionality begets more directionality. Like if you know where you've been, you kind of know the direction you're headed already, and that itself brings some structure to it as well. But you have to get started somewhere, absolutely. And so I really appreciate that input and those insights from you as well. Now, I'm wondering because the hierarchy is very important, and
Mhm.
some pastors step naturally in. They have these administrative gifts. For those that don't, though, they have they struggle to do some of what we're talking about. How do you encourage the parish staff listening right now who feel that weight of leadership, but know that their pastor isn't stepping into that role fully? How can those leaders, those lay leaders, lead well when the pastor's leadership presence isn't strong?
Yeah. And that's a key issue there, John. You've hit that hard. Part of that, I think, then is really and this is beyond maybe what your pastors and those who are listening might think about this. But for the pastors, this is where I would say your role for those of you who are already doing this, your role is to keep this in front of the bishop on how can we better serve my brother priests with regards to helping them step out of the boat. Because that's really what it is. It's really about that very essential aspect that Jesus asked of Peter, is to step out of the boat and to try and walk on water. And for some of us, that's going to be easier than others. But in our diocese, and it's not just our international priests, but we have at least 50% of our parishes that the pastors are international priests. And it's not always part of their culture to lead this way. But even some of our priests from the Des Moines diocese, it's also not their natural way. This is where we need a little bit more systematic help from the vicar general, from our bishop, and then to bring in relevant voices who can really help the pastor be able to do this. And there's a variety of different organizations you can go to. There's consultation that can happen from Divine Renovation. Lencioni's group is another one that does incredible work. Acts 20, was it 29? Anyway, so Father John Ricardo's group. So there's some really good opportunities. But what I would suggest, I believe, what I try and share with pastors is pastoral renewal is not an abstract exercise. Don't let it be an abstract thing, because that does lead to endless meetings. It's saying we need to be able to do this. Let's back it up and say, what are all the steps we need to have to be able to do this in our community? And then what are the financial obligations we need to be able to do this? Start small. Maybe there's 4 or 5 people. Maybe you don't want to start with a town hall, but maybe what you do is you try and say, are there 4 or 5 people that can help me model this so that I can have a better idea? And then we lead into a town hall that leads into that. So those are some ideas I have, but I do think your question does put a little pressure on our diocese to be able to help our pastors be able to learn how to lead in a different way, and not in a way that says the way you've been doing it is bad, but is saying, let's take the ways in which you're naturally shining and add at least a dimension or 2 onto it. And we can do that in priest workshops. We can do that in one-on-one consultation. We can do that in our deanery meetings, etc.
Yeah, and I do too think, there is a reality, right? You read Co-workers in the Vineyard and some of those other documents on what the laity's role is. As laity, you are called in to lead as well. And some of that's going to entail for our pastors, not that you have to do everything, but to be able to delegate well, to know when it's like, yeah, this is not my strength, and it's okay to bring someone in alongside me to help. I guess that's the encouragement I would make for our pastors, is to trust the people that you've hired, and people they're like chomping at the bit. They want to be able to be free to have some decision-making rights in their role,
Yes.
to creatively partner with the Holy Spirit to evangelize and disciple people. And that's just as much a part of leadership as anything, is delegating so that you can be free to do the thing you are uniquely called to in your ministry as a priest. So to not be afraid or shy away from that. Leadership isn't control. Leadership is guidance, right? Leadership is more than just micromanaging all the little pieces. Good leaders actually bring around themselves people who have strengths that are different from them, so they make a stronger whole together than you can by yourself. And so some of that's there can be a tendency sometimes to fight bringing in other people and letting go of some of that control over things. because it feels like weakness, but it's not. Actually, real strength allows you to trust other people. That vulnerability that builds a strong team. And as
Yeah.
well, I would throw out for the lay professional listening, my book, Pray, Plan, Lead, is a
Mm.
great resource. Just kind of start thinking through how you can even approach your pastor with some of those conversations, how you can lead well within the appropriate hierarchy and in relationship with your pastor, even if the rest of the team isn't necessarily on board with renewal at the same level that you are.
And if I can add one thing, John, because
Mhm.
what you just described with the laity, what when you're able to delegate, when father's able to delegate, or even if it's the parish staff person and that person's able to delegate, you're recognizing that other person's baptismal dignity, and you're enhancing what is happening at communion. When you think about all of us proceeding towards Jesus to receive his body, blood, soul, and divinity, there are so many different talents and charisms each of those people have. And so when you, just like when Monsignor Chido, and I hadn't been Catholic all that long, said, "Hey, I need somebody to be able to do this with our young people. Would you be open to that?" That's a dangerous, a vulnerable position for Monsignor Chido back then. And he didn't even know me well. He didn't even know how dangerous that probably was. But he did it. But that helped me understand my baptismal dignity. That helped root me in communion, and then it certainly guaranteed uh, me to participate at a different level. And then that participation, I brought other people to participate. So what you said, John, was with your resource and what you do, it's incredibly important.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Well, John, this has been a great conversation. I mean, we've talked a lot about you've dropped a lot of gold nuggets about ways that any parish listening, they could really move from listening into action in an intentional, strategic, sustainable way. And so I want to thank you for that. I'm wondering, is there anywhere you'd like to invite people to connect with you if they're curious about any of the things that have been going on in the Diocese of Des Moines? Is there anywhere they could go to connect with you?
Sure. You can connect with me. My email is jgaffney, that's Gaffney, at dmdiocese.org. DM is Des Moines, diocese.org. My office phone number is 515-237-5026. And just so you know, we have as many challenges, even though we're dipping our toes in both synodality and pastoral renewal. If any of this has been helpful, it's because we've tried to dip our toes and see what's been helpful and what maybe not to ever do again.
Oh, I appreciate your humility there.
It
Well, John, thanks for being on the podcast today.
was a great joy. Thanks so much, John, and God bless you and all of the good work you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to this episode. If you found it helpful, don't let it be just another good idea. Text it to a priest or a friend in ministry and start that conversation today. Trust the Lord to lead you and go boldly where he calls. And with that, we'll see you in the vineyard.